Imagine waking up on the morning of February 28th, 2026, and turning on the news, only to find out that the entire Middle East had changed overnight. Missiles falling on Tehran, explosions near the Azadi Tower, the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, killed in a targeted strike, oil prices shattering records, stock markets in Asia collapsing, flights grounded from Dubai to Riyadh, and at the center of it all, the United States and Israel launching one of the largest coordinated military campaigns the world has seen in decades. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a threat. This was real, and it happened just days ago. Right now, the Middle East is on fire, and I'm not using that as a figure of speech. Right now, as you're watching this video, the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran is actively reshaping the world order, the global economy, and the lives of hundreds of millions of people who had nothing to do with any political decision made in Washington, Tel Aviv, or Tehran. And the scary part? Most people still don't fully understand what actually happened, why it happened, and, most importantly, where this is all heading. My name is part of a team that has been tracking this story around the clock, and welcome to Unlocked History Hub. In this video, I'm going to give you the full picture. Not just headlines, not just talking points. I'm going to walk you through exactly what went down, what Iran did in retaliation, how the rest of the world has been dragged into this, and what I personally believe is coming next. Because here's the thing. This story is still unfolding right now, and the decisions being made in the next few days could determine whether we see a ceasefire or a catastrophic regional war that drags in more countries than any of us want to think about. If you want the real story, not the sanitized version, not the spin, stay with me, because I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand this conflict better than most people who have been watching the news for a week. And if you find this kind of deep dive analysis valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to Unlocked History Hub right now. We cover the stories that actually matter, the way they deserve to be covered, and your support means we can keep doing exactly that. Now, let's start from the very beginning. Because to understand February 28th, 2026, you need to understand the months and years that made it inevitable. For years, the tension between Iran and the United States had been building in a slow burn that most people were content to ignore. There was the 2023 Gaza War, which unleashed a wave of regional proxy conflicts. There was the 2024 period of escalating tit-for-tat strikes between Israel and Iran, and then came June 2025, the 12-day war, when Israel first struck Iran's nuclear facilities in a massive aerial campaign, and the United States joined in, hitting sites at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. That conflict ended with a ceasefire after 12 days, with Iran claiming its program was set back, but not destroyed. Over 600 Iranians were killed. Iran's regional alliances, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, had already been severely weakened by Israeli military action over the preceding years. But here's what's critical to understand, that June 2025 war did not solve anything. It only delayed the reckoning. Iran kept enriching uranium. Protests broke out across Iran in late 2025 and into early 2026 over a collapsing economy, soaring inflation, and an increasingly desperate population. The Iranian rial had plunged. Inflation was running above 40%. Multiple banks were on the verge of collapse. The regime was, by any honest assessment, at its weakest point in decades. And that weakness, ironically, is part of what led to what happened on February 28th. While U.S. envoys had been quietly meeting with Iranian negotiators in Oman and Muscat for weeks, trying to build a new nuclear framework, something else was happening behind the scenes. American and Israeli intelligence agencies, including the CIA and Mossad, had been tracking the movements of Iran's top leadership for months. They knew that on the morning of February 28th, Supreme Leader Khamenei and several top Iranian officials were planning to meet at a compound in Tehran, housing Iran's national security apparatus. The decision was made to strike. At dawn on February 28, 2026, Israel launched a massive coordinated assault on Iranian targets, nuclear infrastructure, ballistic missile sites, military command centers, and key leadership locations. Within hours, the United States joined under an operation they named Operation Epic Fury. President Trump announced from Washington that this was a major combat operation aimed at eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. And, in his own words, he made it clear the goal was not just to degrade Iran's military, but to collapse the Islamic Republic itself. Regime change. That word was used openly. More than 3,000 targets were struck in Iran in just the first 10 days. The scale of this was unlike anything we had seen since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And within hours of the first strikes, one piece of news changed the entire calculus. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran for over 3 decades, the man who had shaped every major policy decision of the Islamic Republic since 1989, was dead. Killed in an Israeli strike on the Tehran compound. Now, this is where I want to give you my honest analysis, because I think this is something most commentators are getting wrong. A lot of people assumed that killing Khamenei would cause the Iranian regime to fracture or collapse quickly. The Trump administration seemed to believe this. Their logic was that if you remove the head, the body will fall. But from everything I've studied about the Iranian system of governance, and I want to be very clear, this is my personal view based on research. The Islamic Republic is not a one-man operation. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is an institution unto itself. It has its own economy, its own intelligence networks, its own military command structure. Killing the supreme leader doesn't destroy the IRGC. And it's the IRGC that is currently running Iran's retaliation. And that retaliation, that is the part of this story that truly shocked the world. Iran did not respond with token strikes the way it had in previous confrontations. This time, Iranian officials made it clear from the very first hour, everything is on the table. Iran's IRGC announced attacks on at least 27 U.S. military bases across the Middle East. In Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, and Oman. They launched waves of ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, hitting Tel Aviv and other cities. They threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow 33-kilometer-wide waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's daily oil supply flows. And in one of the most dramatic and symbolically significant moves, an Iranian drone struck a runway at a UK military base in Cyprus. The human cost has been staggering. As of early March 2026, more than 155 people had been killed in Iran alone. At least 13 Israelis were dead. 8 U.S. soldiers had lost their lives. 14 people were killed across Gulf states. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, despite earlier hesitation, eventually launched rockets toward northern Israel following the killing of Khamenei, and Israel responded with heavy strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. Over 394 people were killed in Lebanon, including 83 children. More than 500,000 people were displaced in just a week of fighting. A girls' elementary school in the Iranian city of Manab was struck by a U.S.-Israeli bomb. Over 4,000 civilian buildings had been damaged in Iran by the 6th of March. This is not just a military conflict. This is a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in real time. Now, I want to talk about something that almost nobody in the mainstream conversation is giving enough attention to, and that is the global economic impact of this war. Because this conflict is not just destroying lives in the Middle East, it is already hitting people in your wallet, whether you live in Chicago, London, Mumbai, or Seoul. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point between Iran and the UAE, through which about 20 million barrels of oil pass every single day, has effectively stalled. Shipping vessels have stopped transiting, traffic through the strait has collapsed, and the economic consequences have been immediate and severe. Oil prices, which were sitting around $70 per barrel before the attacks, surged to over $119 per barrel within days, the first time oil breached $100 since Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. That is a 70% price spike in under 2 weeks. Gas prices across the United States jumped by 43 cents per gallon in a single week. In Europe, LNG natural gas prices more than doubled to 3-year highs after Qatar Energy, which alone supplies 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, declared force majeure following Iranian drone attacks on the Ras Laffan facility, the largest LNG plant on Earth. Think about what that means. Qatar supplies a fifth of the world's natural gas. That supply is now disrupted. The ripple effect runs from European heating bills to Asian power plants to factories in India and manufacturing hubs in South Korea. And the stock markets confirmed just how serious this is. Japan's Nikkei index fell more than 5% in a single day. South Korea's Kospi crashed, triggering a circuit breaker, in what analysts called its biggest single-day drop since the 2008 financial crisis. European markets fell 2 to 3%. Amazon Web Services confirmed that 2 of its data centers in the UAE were directly struck by Iranian drones, causing outages. Dubai International Airport was affected. Burj Al Arab Hotel was targeted. Etihad Towers in Abu Dhabi. Jebel Ali Port. These are not obscure military installations. These are the beating heart of global commerce. The International Monetary Fund has a clear formula for this. Every sustained 10% rise in oil prices results in a 0.4% rise in global inflation and a 0.15% reduction in global economic growth. We are looking at a 70% rise in oil prices. You do not need to be an economist to understand that the math here is devastating. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that this conflict is pushing the Federal Reserve further away from cutting interest rates and could fuel inflation on top of the tariff pressures that were already squeezing American households. In Europe, the ECB is facing what analysts described as a genuine dilemma: raise rates to fight the oil shock or hold to protect a weakening economy. There is no easy answer. Countries like India and China are facing the sharpest pain. India imports more than 80% of its crude oil, with nearly half coming from the Gulf. China is the world's largest oil importer and sources close to half of its energy from the Middle East. A prolonged disruption of Hormuz would not just raise prices. It could cause actual energy shortages in some of the world's most populous nations. Here is my honest opinion on what all of this means, and I want to be very straight with you. I believe this is the most consequential geopolitical event since the 2003 Iraq War, and in some ways, it may be more unpredictable than that. In 2003, the target was a regime that had no real ability to strike back at the global economy in a meaningful way. Iran is different. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has proxy forces in multiple countries. Iran has ballistic missiles that have already demonstrated the ability to overwhelm certain air defense systems. And Iran is now fighting, in the words of its own officials, for its survival. When a nation is fighting for survival, it does not behave rationally by normal standards. It escalates. It takes risks. And that is what makes the next few weeks so genuinely dangerous. The world has reacted with alarm. The United Nations held an Emergency Security Council session. The EU urged maximum restraint. The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer condemned Iranian counterstrikes and authorized US forces to use UK military bases, including Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford, for what he called a specific and limited defensive purpose. Oman, which had served as the secret diplomatic backchannel between the US and Iran for months, urged Washington not to get pulled further into the conflict. China and Russia expressed strong opposition to the attacks. Even within the Gulf states, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, there is deep discomfort. These governments have publicly sided with the U.S. alliance, but privately, they are furious. They did not want to be dragged into a war. They explicitly said so before the strikes began. And now Iranian missiles and drones are hitting their airports, their oil terminals, their hotels, and their military bases. The question I keep coming back to, and this is genuinely the question that keeps me up at night, is, what is the end game here? The Trump administration has said they believe this war will be over within weeks. Trump himself told reporters he wanted to be involved in selecting Iran's next leader. That is an extraordinarily bold claim. I understand the logic. Iran is weakened, its proxies are weakened, its economy is collapsing, and the regime's legitimacy among its own people was already at historic lows before the bombs started falling. But here is the problem with that logic, and this is where I fundamentally disagree with the assumption that regime change is imminent. The Iranian opposition is fragmented. There is no unified alternative ready to step in. The IRGC has operated for 47 years under a disciplined command structure that does not simply dissolve because a supreme leader is killed or because bombs are falling. In fact, external military pressure in many historical cases has had the opposite effect. It rallies populations around their government, even governments they otherwise despise, because national survival becomes the dominant emotion. Look at the history. Iraq after 2003 did not become stable after regime change. It became a decade of chaos that birthed ISIS. Libya after 2011 descended into civil war that still hasn't been resolved. Regime change by external military force has an extraordinarily poor track record. And Iran is vastly more complex, more institutionalized, and more regionally embedded than either of those cases. My personal view, and I want to be clear this is my analysis, is that the most likely near-term outcome is some form of negotiated ceasefire, probably brokered through Oman or another neutral party, possibly involving Russia and China as pressure levers on Tehran. But even if that ceasefire comes, the damage to the global economy, to regional stability, and to the lives of hundreds of thousands of people will take years to repair. The oil infrastructure that has been damaged in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE will not be back online overnight. The LNG supply disruption could last months. Insurance premiums for Gulf shipping are already through the roof. Supply chains that depend on the Middle East, from electronics to pharmaceuticals to food, are already being disrupted. And there is one more dimension to this story that I think deserves serious attention: the humanitarian cost inside Iran. More than 100,000 people fled Tehran in the first 2 days of the attacks. Over 1,200 Iranian civilians have been killed so far. A girls' school was bombed. Civilian infrastructure is being destroyed. Regardless of how you feel about the Iranian government or its nuclear program, there are 90 million ordinary Iranian people living under those bombs right now. Their power grids are damaged. Their hospitals are overwhelmed. Their economy was already broken before a single bomb fell. That human suffering matters. Full stop. I want to end with this thought. What we are witnessing right now is not just a military operation. It is a turning point. The Middle East that existed before February 28, 2026 is gone. The question is, what replaces it? Will it be a more stable region with a diminished Iranian threat? Or will it be a fractured, economically devastated, radicalized zone of conflict that spawns the next generation of instability? The answer to that question depends on decisions being made right now, and on whether the people making those decisions are thinking beyond the next military briefing to the next 10 years of consequences. That is what history tells us. Every major military intervention that didn't have a clear, realistic political plan for what comes after ended in disaster. And right now, I genuinely do not see that plan. I hope I'm wrong. I truly do. This is Unlocked History Hub. I have given you the full story, the military facts, the economic fallout, the global reaction, and my honest opinion on where this is going. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think this war will end quickly? Or are we looking at a prolonged conflict that reshapes the entire region? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video gave you a clearer understanding of what is happening and why it matters, please share it with someone who needs to see it. Share it on WhatsApp, on Twitter, send it to a friend who's been asking questions about the news. These conversations matter, and every share helps this channel reach more people with honest, in-depth analysis. Thank you for watching Unlocked History Hub. Stay informed, stay thoughtful, and I will see you in the next one.